Hi, this is Ellie Fishman, and I forgot to comb my hair. I also don't have any visitors today, so it's me speaking, and it's great to be here. And I was just, I when we were picking a topic, I said, let me talk about Australia. So I went to Australia last week to speak at the Red AIM 2019 conference, and it was an excellent meeting. Australia, some of you may not know, but it's a long way from Baltimore. You have to fly, first you have to fly to the West Coast. Then you fly from there to Sydney, and that's about 15 or 16 hours. And in this case, I was going to Queensland, which is kind of somewhere between Sydney and Brisbane. So I had to fly to Brisbane, then they drove me to Queensland. Queensland's kind of this really nice place, which kind of looks like Miami Beach, and that's what they say. There's tall buildings, casinos, very nice. It was the winter there, which was 75 degrees, and at the high and 55 on the lower. So it's just absolutely gorgeous weather. Beautiful part of the world. There's something good about not having massive populations or massive pollution. Just very, very pretty, and also good not to have humidity. It was a really good meeting, and actually, Elliot Siegel, who is literally 2 miles away at the University of Maryland, was also one of the speakers. And so I think I gave 9 talks. I spoke about pancreas and liver and kidneys and misdiagnosis and protocols, but also spoke about AI and sort of the future of radiology, where things were going, and about the future of technologists. And Elliot Siegel spoke about AI and where things were going as well. It's kind of interesting that when you look at things, although Australia and the US are a long way apart, many things are very, very similar. Everyone is very excited about radiology, with a lot of techs at the meeting, a lot of doctors at the meeting, a lot of administrators. So everyone is really excited about where imaging is, particularly CT. And they had a number of vendors, from Siemens to Philips to Canon to GE, showing a bunch of stuff. And so they're excited about technology. They're also excited about AI, just like in the US and probably everywhere in the world. They're not so much the word is concerned, but they wonder where things are going with AI. What will be the impact on them, on their patient? And I think they're very positive about if AI can really work to improve care. I think Australia has some challenges. Remember, it's a very, very large country, kind of the size of the US, and Sydney's on the right, and where I was on the right, and then you have Perth way on the left. This is kind of like New York to LA type thing, long distance, and a lot of empty land. And so they're spread out, a lot of smaller hospitals and clinics. And so coverage tends to be a challenge. You can't have radiologists everywhere, so a lot of things are teleradiology. And how do you do things when you have limited, not so much the resources, but limited manpower and a lot of areas to cover? So it's very interesting, and they're working on it, doing a great job, and teleradiology is great there. I know reception is really good, the networking. So, for example, when I spoke to people in Baltimore, I had one of those AT&T plans where for $10 you could speak like you were home. And so my kids called my grandson, they did the FaceTime. But when you spoke to people on the phone, it was much clearer. When I speak to somebody from the hospital or from my home or on the road, it's terrible reception all the time. In Australia, the reception was incredible. People thought you were standing next to them. And that's how it sounded. I've never heard the phone so clear. And it's not like Australia is 5G. Australia is just 4G like everybody else at this point. But it's really the clarity of things in Australia. And so that part was really cool. And I met some really nice people, a lot of people who were CTisus fans. And so if you ever want to go to Australia, just time it with the Rad AIM meeting, and then you could really, you can kill 2 birds with 1 stone, as they would say. But that part, it was really just wonderful. And I thank Reese and everybody, his staff and faculty, for being so kind. It's interesting, they had food, so the meeting served breakfast the last day, and they served lunch, and they served snacks. So, the snacks are kind of the same, like the breakfast snack. The U.S. people in meetings have cut back a lot. There they had donuts, and they also had muffins, and I tasted the muffins, which are really good. They also had coffee, And then at lunch, they had like a buffet. So they had fish and beef and all these sort of things. So the first day they had salmon. So that was pretty easy. I figured that out really well. And the second day, they had a menu. So I read the menu and I read it very quickly. And I thought it said they had barracuda. I look at the fish and I ain't eating barracuda. And I figured, boy, this is Australia. Maybe they have barracuda. Maybe they have koala bears. I don't know what they eat. But everything else I saw looked kind of the same and it had barracuda. So I said something. I said, oh, it's interesting. I never heard of barracuda. I know what a barracuda is. I've seen it on TV and they have a lot of sharp teeth. So I figured, man, it doesn't look like a very tasty looking fish. But they said, no, you got to read. It's barramundi. And I did look it up. Barramundi is a sea bass, and it's a really good sea bass. So it's really good. And actually, it's a very healthy fish. The other thing is, it's interesting how people thousands of miles apart are the same but different. So on Sunday morning for breakfast, they had smoked salmon, and really excellent smoked salmon. But normally when you say smoked salmon, you say, okay, smoked salmon, I got a bagel, maybe a sesame bagel, maybe some cream cheese, maybe an onion, maybe some lettuce, maybe tomato. Not exactly. They had smoked salmon with brie cheese on a croissant. First of all, a croissant and smoked salmon, that seems like you broke some law or something in like 19 states. And brie, what about cream cheese? How do you get brie? Well, let me just tell you, with all my complaining, if you tasted it, it was outstanding. Now, I'm not saying I'm going to New York and I'm going to get a croissant with brie and smoked salmon. If you walked into Zucker's or one of the other really good bagel places in New York and you asked for that, they'd probably have you arrested or committed. In New York, that might be considered a crime to eat smoked salmon on something that was not a bagel. But there, it was pretty good. So a number of things in terms of the trip. Also, I didn't spend that much. I really didn't tour. I came in and out just because of my schedule and stuff. I did go to the mall. They had this mall that wasn't far from the hotel. It was like about a 500-store mall, just a tremendous mall. And it's interesting, if you think about the stores, about 70% of the stores I could have seen 10 minutes from my house at one of the local malls. And probably another 15% were the exact store we had here, but it was called a different name. And there's about 10% of the stores or so that were kind of unique, but there weren't very many unique stores. And then if you ask the food, one thing I noticed, people in Australia, and I did find out, really like coffee. They're very picky. So there was like 15 different places selling coffee. Some were like Starbucks. Okay, I know that one, Dunkin' Donuts. But many of them were just local, probably just local shops. And so they had a lot of that. And then you look at the food, and there it was. Burger King, Kentucky Fried Chicken, McDonald's, Panera's, all the usual things we would see in Baltimore or around the country. And there was Chinese food, a lot of Chinese and Japanese and Mexican. Again, all of the typical staples you would see in the U.S. I really am trying to think hard. Maybe I saw one store that had, something Australian, something or other. But it was interesting how the universal nature of things, I guess, one of the problems people complain about in New York now is because of high rents. The mom and pop stores, they're one store, they have two, are being pushed out of business because of high rent. And that kind of makes everything very homogenized. And it's interesting, Australia and the US so far apart, but the food and the stores really are identical. It's kind of really amazing. And the people also, they speak English. They speak better English than we speak in Baltimore. Maybe that's not saying much, but they speak really good English. A few people have accents, but I noticed the people who had accents, where I recognized it was a heavy accent or an accent, were people who came from England who were in Australia. People from Australia sounded like they were from Long Island or something. They all sounded like perfect English. It's interesting. The Australian and England, there were a number of people who had been both places. It's also interesting how different things are focused. So, for example, in Australia now, they do a lot of mining. So coal mining is very big there, and it's always been. But they also do a lot of polishing of stone And so silicosis has become a major problem there. And it's not silicosis when you think about older patients, but it's patients in their 20s and 30s, people who are working on rock to finish rock, kind of like for kitchen counters, as they would say. So they're really putting a lot of effort into identifying patients with silicosis or exposure, trying to minimize exposure, but also trying to treat these patients and also trying to figure out who has disease. And it's really a challenge. And again, Australia, because they have large coal reserves, and because of China buying a large amount of coal, they do have a lot of mining. And, even with all the safety we talk about, it's still being a challenge. So there was a couple of speakers actually speaking about that, and then speaking about silicosis and one of the challenges and how the government's working on that, both on the safety side as well as on the detection side, and then of course treatment, and then also compensating people who have that. It also does make clear about the importance of teleradiology, but also the importance of the fact we're on Facebook. And so many people there, and again, I got to put up some of the pictures. I've been a little bit tardy because it's just been a busy week, were people who are fans of CTisus. So remember, you have fans 12,000 miles away. I hate to use the word fans. You're people who use CTisus, 12,000 miles away in their daily practice, and listening to things like here. I'm sure they're going to be listening. And now it's the time sequence is kind of bad. The Australia is 14 hours ahead. So right now it's about noontime in Baltimore. So there it's about 2 in the morning. So I think they'll be probably looking at me tomorrow. The definite difference, a little bit in culture. The biggest cultural thing I saw different was they drive the cars on the wrong side of the street. So it's a little bit scary, whenever you get in a car, whether it's in a place like the Cayman Islands or if you were in London, when the cars are on the wrong side of the street, the driver's on the wrong side, you try to get in the passenger side, and you wonder why the passenger side has a wheel. It looks like you have a real car. Then you realize you're on the wrong side. So that part's pretty good. Scott spoke his comment. The universal healthcare system in Australia is known as Medicare, provides healthcare to all its citizens and residents with free health services. I don't know. They did not speak about the health system. I think, it is available. I think that's one of the things that is good. And the quality does seem to be substantially good. They have a lot of people who trained in other train locally in Australia. There's a number of medical schools. Not many people from the U.S. Remember, in the U.S., that's where teleradiology started. Paul Berger's company was reading from Sydney because of that 12 hours or 14-hour time zone difference. And it's actually 14 hours now. So I was speaking on Sunday to my kids who were on Saturday. Was kind of goofy in that regard. People have any questions? Is a good time. I think the growth factors in driving teleradiology really, I think in general, is Nighthawk. Everybody wants 24/7 coverage, and no one wants to work 24/7. So people are getting Nighthawks because the hospitals are demanding Nighthawks. Some of the groups are concerned with some of the companies potentially trying to steal a day business. So some groups are actually hiring their own Nighthawks. And I know we had our fellows leave, about a dozen fellows left this past year. A couple stayed, but the people who left, more than half of them went to some sort of teleradiology practice by choice. There are a lot of jobs in radiology, so the job market's really strong. But if you want to work from home, you can work for the Cleveland Clinic, you can work from many different places. And it's a lifestyle issue, I think, both men and women who want to work very defined hours. Maybe it's because of kids or whatever else there is. Maybe you want to play golf during the day. But you can really control it by choosing select hours. And I see that becoming very, 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 very practical and very, very popular. You can say, well, you don't communicate with physicians, but many physicians radiologists don't want to communicate. And they put themselves down the hallway in the basement in a building far away from where the scanners are. So whether you're in the basement or you're 3,000 miles away or somewhere in between, it probably doesn't matter if that's what you want to do. More and more, particularly in a market where There's a lot of jobs available. People have a lot of work to do. Teleradiology model is good. There's no travel. People are more efficient, and perhaps they read more per time frame. Also, in teleradiology, you're incentivized to read more. Everything is incentivized. Now, let's say here's Chris saying not all services are free. Gap payments are required for services, and certain people qualify for bulk billing. So I'm not going to get into how Australia works. We talk about the health system in Canada and London. You don't hear much about Australia, maybe because it's far away or maybe because it works. But maybe we'll have some people, some of our friends who are in Australia, maybe comment on it. So one last question from you, Scott. What would you take back to America as a best practice from Australia? I think the one thing is the inquisitiveness. I think it's the positive nature of the people about healthcare. It's the fact that healthcare is changing, but they want to be on top of the change. They don't want to be left behind. And they're not really fighting yesterday's battles. I think big country, distributed acquisition of data. How do you use technology to make yourself better? How do you make it affordable? And how do you not wear out the physicians by having them getting into planes and shuttles and everything else to try to cover the country? So with that, I'll stop there. And again, I'll thank all my friends in Australia for wonderful hospitality. I'll thank everybody else for coming along today and taking a listen. And with that, I have to run to a meeting, and I'll see you next week. Bye.